He stopped at the service corridor outside the private lift. The indicator light was on, but the doors were sealed and the access log showed no call for 3 hours. A faint tapping came from inside, irregular, patient, almost careful. The guard rested his gloved hand on the emergency key and waited. Protocol said report and stand down. The tapping stopped. The silence felt deliberate. The corridor outside the private lift held its temperature like a sealed drawer. Cool stone underfoot, faint hum in the walls, no foot traffic. The guard stood just beyond the camera's cone, where the ceiling lights dimmed by a fraction. He had positioned himself there deliberately, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid appearing impatient. The lift indicator glowed a steady white, not blinking, not fall tread, operational. He checked his watch, logged the time. Then he checked the access panel again, though he already knew what it would show. The screen returned the same sterile message: system active, await authorization, no alerts, no mechanical flags, no emergency override request registered. The log entry before the current hold was stamped 3 hours earlier. After that, nothing. A blank line where a supervisory release should have been. He keyed his throat mic once softly. Post 7 to Control, confirming private lift status. Control replied after a pause that was just long enough to be noticeable. Status unchanged, awaiting clearance. The guard did not ask who held the clearance. He knew better. Instead, he ran through the physical checks again. The door seam was intact. No vibration through the metal, no heat bleed. The emergency access slot was covered by its brass plate, unmarked. Someone had chosen not to touch it. A sound reached him then, not through the intercom, not through the panel, but through the door itself. Light, rhythmic, fingertips, he thought. Not a knock meant to attract attention, a test of presence. He angled his head closer, careful not to step into camera view. Tap, pause, tap, tap, long pause. The pattern repeated once, then stopped. He exhaled through his nose and activated the intercom. Occupant, identify yourself. There was silence. He waited, counting breaths, watching the indicator light as if it might flicker under pressure. When the reply came, it was faint but controlled. It's me. The guard adjusted the intercom volume down, not up. Children learned quickly in this building. Are you injured? No. Are you alone? Another pause. Yes. That answer told him more than the word itself. Alone meant an escort had failed to log out or been instructed not to. He glanced down the corridor, still empty. The palace absorbed anomalies the way stone absorbed heat, slowly, without visible reaction. Stay where you are, he said. Help is being arranged. I know. The guard closed the intercom channel. He documented the exchange in his log, precise and unemotional. Time of contact. Condition of occupant. No distress indicators observed, except duration of confinement. He forwarded the update to Control, marking it child present, a classification that triggered a separate review pathway. The response came back almost immediately. Maintain position. Do not engage emergency release. Clearance pending. He stared at the message longer than necessary. The wording was careful. Do not engage, not unable, not restricted. A choice framed as instruction. A soft click sounded behind him. Footsteps approached, measured and unhurried. An aide in a dark suit stopped beside him, eyes flicking to the lift, then to the guard's face. There's no cause for alarm, the aide said quietly. This is a scheduling issue. The guard kept his gaze forward. There is a child inside. Yes, and that is being handled. By whom? The aide's smile was brief, professional, and gone as quickly as it appeared. Above your level. The tapping resumed inside the lift, slower now, less certain. The guard felt it in his chest before he heard it. He did not move his hand from the emergency key. The aide stepped half a pace closer, lowering his voice as if proximity itself conferred authority. You've logged the presence. That's sufficient. Control will resolve the delay. The guard did not answer. He was listening instead to the air in the shaft, to the faint mechanical breath of the building. The lift's cooling fan cycled on and off at regular intervals. Normal operation. No failure, which meant every minute that passed was a decision, not an accident. He keyed his mic again. Control, confirm hydration status protocol when a miner is confined beyond 2 hours. The reply came slower this time. Stand by. Stand by. The phrase was neutral, but it landed with weight. He pictured the log entry filling with time stamps that explained nothing. He pictured how absence could later be described as compliance. Inside the lift, the tapping stopped. Silence followed, deeper than before. He activated the intercom without PR. "Ompting, are you still with me?" "Yes," the voice said, softer now. "It's getting warm." He adjusted the intercom angle slightly, blocking the aide's view of his mouth. "Breathe slowly," he said. "No reassurance beyond instruction. Sit if you can." "I am." The aide cleared his throat. "You're escalating this unnecessarily." The guard finally turned his head. The aide's eyes were steady, practiced. Not cruel, just aligned elsewhere. "A child has been confined for 3 hours in an operational lift without supervision," the guard said. "That is not scheduling." "It's containment," the aide replied. "Temporary quiet." The word lingered, quiet, as if sound itself were the risk. Control broke in. "Post 7, clearance delayed, maintain position." "Delayed by whom?" the guard asked. A pause longer than before. "Await further instruction." The guard looked at the emergency access plate again. The brass showed faint wear at the edges, evidence of prior use, carefully polished over. He imagined the maintenance engineer who would later claim the mechanism required dual authorization. He imagined how true that would sound. He opened his log and began a new entry. Occupant reports rising temperature. Duration exceeds welfare threshold. He marked it observed, not assessed. Words mattered. The aide shifted his stance. "If you force that door, you create an incident. Incidents require explanations. Explanations travel." "So does dehydration," the guard said evenly. He pressed the intercom once more. "When was the last time you drank water?" A hesitation. "This morning." The guard checked the time. Early afternoon now. He felt the corridor's coolness against his wrists, the faint sweat gathering under his collar. He imagined the lift's air growing stale, the child conserving breath without being told. He keyed control again, voice steady. "Requesting authorization to engage emergency release under Child Welfare Directive." The response came sharp. "Denied." The aide exhaled, relief flickering across his face before he smoothed it away. "You see." The guard did not respond. He was counting. Seconds between fan cycles, minutes since last contact. He knew the directive as well as control did. He also knew the clause that followed denial. In absence of authorization, guard may act to prevent imminent harm. Imminent was a flexible word, often rewritten after the fact. The tapping resumed, one slow tap then another. No pattern now, just effort. The guard removed the brass plate. The metal was cool against his palm. The aide's voice sharpened. "Do not." "I am documenting," the guard said aloud for the cameras. He angled his body so his hands were visible. No secrecy. No haste. Emergency access engaged due to prolonged confinement of a minor. The aide stepped back, already preparing the report he would give. The guard inserted the key and turned. The mechanism resisted, then yielded with a low, mechanical groan that echoed down the corridor. Somewhere deeper in the palace, an alert chimed, not loud but unmistakable. He paused with the door still sealed, listening to the sound travel. Then he pulled. The doors parted with a controlled reluctance, metal sliding over metal until the gap widened enough to release the heat. It rolled out first, stale, dry, carrying the faint scent of fabric and plastic. The guard did not rush. He widened the opening another hand's breadth and stopped, allowing air to exchange before stepping closer. The child sat on the floor against the rear wall, knees drawn in, hands folded precisely in their lap. Training showed even in stillness. The posture was deliberate, conserving energy, conserving space. The child's eyes lifted, tracking the guard's boots before moving to his face. No tears, no panic, just attention. "I'm here," the guard said. He kept his voice level, audible without carrying. "Do you feel dizzy?" The child shook their head once, a fraction too slow. The guard knelt, staying outside the lift's threshold. He noted the color in the child's face, paler than it should have been, lips dry. He removed his gloves and placed them on the floor beside him, palms up, an unspoken signal of intent. The aide hovered behind him, silent now, aware the cameras were recording everything worth recording. "I'm going to bring you out," the guard said. "Stand slowly." The child complied without question. Their hand brushed the wall for balance. The guard extended an arm, not touching until the child leaned in. Contact was brief, professional. He felt the slight tremor through the sleeve. As they stepped into the corridor, the temperature drop registered immediately. The child inhaled once, then again, deeper. The guard guided them to the side wall, positioning his body between the child and the corridor's open sightlines. He keyed his mic. "Occupant removed. Conscious. Request medical assessment." "Understood," Control replied, clipped. Footsteps approached, Palace medical staff, efficient and quiet. The aide intercepted them with a murmur, redirecting their path a half-step away from the cameras. The guard noticed. He said nothing. Instead, he watched the child's breathing steady, watched their shoulders lower by degrees. A medic offered water. The child took it in small sips, exactly as instructed. The guard noted the discipline and felt the weight of it. Someone had taught the child how to endure without complaint. "Where is your escort?" the guard asked gently when the medic finished. The child's eyes flicked to the lift, then back. "They said to wait." "Did they leave you here?" Another pause. "They said they'd be back soon." Soon had stretched into hours. The guard logged the statement mentally, not yet on paper. Timing mattered. A senior officer arrived, expression neutral, gaze flicking from the forced door to the child. "You acted without authorization," he said to the guard. "I acted under welfare directive," the guard replied. "No defensiveness, just fact." The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll address that." Medical staff signaled readiness to move the child. The guard stepped aside, maintaining visual until the child was escorted down the corridor and out of sight. Only then did he feel the corridor's emptiness return. The way sound seemed to settle back into the walls. The aide spoke again, quieter now. "This will be contained." The guard looked at the lift, its doors scarred, the emergency plate removed. Evidence. He imagined the reports already forming, language smoothing edges, turning choice into necessity and necessity into error. He opened his log and began to write. The corridor did not empty immediately. Authority never left all at once. It thinned in layers. The medic disappeared first, then the escort detail, then the senior officer after a brief exchange with Control that carried more weight than volume. Only the aide remained, standing just beyond the camera's edge, hands folded, watching the guard complete his log. The guard wrote slowly, not out of caution, out of precision, time stamps, direct observations, exact phrasing. He avoided adjectives that invited interpretation. Temperature elevated, occupant responsive, escort absent at time of contact. Each line was a stone placed carefully, knowing which might later be removed. "You realize," the aide said, "that your report will trigger a review." "Yes." "And reviews rarely end where they begin." The guard closed the log and sealed it digitally. "That is acceptable." The aide studied him for a moment, as if recalculating. "You could have waited another hour." The guard met his gaze, expression unchanged. "No." The aide nodded once, conceding nothing, and turned away. His footsteps faded, absorbed by the palace's thickness. Silence returned, but it was altered now, charged like air after machinery shuts down. The guard approached the lift again. Maintenance would arrive soon. They would photograph the forced mechanism, replace the plate, reset the system. By evening, the corridor would look unchanged. Only the logs would remember, and logs could be revised. He checked the intercom one last time. The lift was empty now, its walls marked by faint scuffs where shoes had shifted, where a child had paced just enough to stay awake. He imagined how easily those marks would be cleaned. Control called him directly. "Post 7. You are to report to internal review at 1800. "Understood." He acknowledged and disconnected. No commentary followed. That, too, was telling. As he stood there, he replayed the child's voice in his head, not the words, but the restraint behind them. The way training had replaced fear. The way compliance had been mistaken for safety. He felt a tightening in his chest, not anger, not pride. Something colder. Resolve without drama. He updated his log one final time before leaving the post. Child transferred to medical care. He hesitated, then added a final line. Escort whereabouts unconfirmed. It was a small sentence. It would draw attention. The guard replaced his gloves and straightened his uniform. The corridor lights brightened a fraction as the system reset, erasing the earlier dimness. Normality asserted itself, as it always did. As he walked away, he knew this chapter would not close cleanly. The child was safe for now. But the mechanism that had sealed the lift was still in place, unseen, waiting for another quiet decision. The review suite sat below ground level, where the palace walls thickened and windows disappeared entirely. The guard arrived 5 minutes early and waited outside until the indicator above the door shifted from amber to white. Even here, access lights mattered. Inside, the room was cool and evenly lit, designed to prevent fatigue or comfort from influencing tone. A single table, 3 chairs, a wall screen dark for now. The guard stood until instructed to sit. No one rushed him. That was intentional. The senior officer entered first, followed by a legal advisor he had not met before, civilian suit, no insignia. The third chair remained empty. "You forced a secured lift without authorization," the officer said, once they were seated. "Yes." Despite a direct denial. "Yes." The legal advisor made a note. The sound of the stylus against glass was faint but constant, a metronome for the room. "Walk us through your decision," the officer said. The guard did not narrate emotion. He listed sequence. Time elapsed. Environmental conditions, statements made by the occupant, absence of escort. He referenced directives by number, not name. He avoided conclusions. When he finished, there was no silence, just the soft continuation of note-taking. "You were aware," the legal advisor said, without looking up, "that authorization was withheld for a reason." "I was aware authorization was withheld," the guard replied. "No reason was provided." The officer leaned back slightly. "Reasons are not always shared." "No," the guard agreed. The empty chair remained empty. That, too, was a message. Whoever owned the decision to withhold clearance was not present and did not intend to be. The wall screen activated, displaying the access log. Clean. Too clean. The 3-hour gap appeared as a neutral system hold, stripped of context. The legal advisor highlighted the timestamp. "This entry indicates no emergency signal was triggered." "Correct," the guard said. "The occupant did not activate it." "Why not?" The guard paused. "Because the occupant had been instructed to wait." The legal advisor's stylus stopped. The officer's eyes lifted. That sentence would not be ignored. "Instructed by whom?" the officer asked. "I cannot confirm," the guard said. "The escort did not sign out." The officer folded his hands. "You're implying misconduct." I am documenting absence, the guard replied. Others may interpret it. The screen shifted to footage, corridor camera, timestamped. The guard watched himself stand, wait, check the panel, watched the aide arrive, watched the moment he removed the emergency plate. The footage had no sound. Without audio, intent flattened into motion. You hesitated, the legal advisor noted, before engaging the release. Yes. Why? The guard chose his words carefully, because once engaged, the action cannot be reversed. The officer nodded, as if that answer confirmed something already decided. And you understood the consequences. Yes. A second door opened behind them. Footsteps entered. The third chair was finally occupied. The aide from the corridor sat down without acknowledgement, placing a thin folder on the table. For clarity, the aide said, voice even, the delay was procedural. A scheduling conflict involving senior movement required temporary isolation of the lift. The guard did not react. He watched the officer instead. A child was placed in that lift, the guard said. Not an accusation, a fact. The aide's gaze shifted to him. A child remained in the lift. The distinction was deliberate. The legal advisor resumed writing. The guard understood then how this would proceed. Responsibility would diffuse upward, then outward until it settled somewhere safe, not on a person, on a process. The officer cleared his throat. This review will continue. The guard inclined his head once. Outside the room, the palace carried on, silent and immaculate. Inside, the chain of permission tightened, each link polished, each gap defended. The aide slid the folder across the table. Its cover bore no markings, no seal, just weight. The officer opened it without hurry, scanning the first page, then the second. The legal advisor leaned in slightly, reading along. The guard remained still, hands resting on his knees, posture unchanged. This document, the aide said, establishes that the lift was placed in restricted status at 11:47 under discretionary authority. By whom? The officer asked. The aide named a department, not a person. The guard noted the phrasing. Departments did not make decisions. People did, but departments absorbed consequences more effectively. And the child, the officer asked, was not scheduled to remain inside, the aide replied. The escort failed to adjust plans. Failed, the guard repeated quietly. The aide met his eyes. Circumstances shifted. The legal advisor finally looked up. Escort identification. The aide's pause was brief, but it existed. Pending verification. The officer closed the folder. So we have an unscheduled delay, an absent escort, and a guard who acted outside authorization. Yes, the aide said. One of these elements created an incident. The guard understood the framing immediately. The incident was not the confinement. It was the noise, the forced door, the alert that could not be unheard. You are aware, the officer said to the guard, that by forcing the release, you initiated a reportable breach. Yes. And that breach obliges us to examine your judgment. Yes. The officer studied him for a moment. Longer than necessary. Do you believe you exercised sound judgment? The question was not rhetorical. The guard answered without emphasis. Yes. No elaboration followed. He did not defend himself. Defense invited debate. He had already placed the facts where they belonged. The legal advisor tapped the table once, a signal. The review will note your compliance history, she said, which is exemplary. The aide's jaw tightened slightly. However, she continued, it will also note deviation from instruction. The guard nodded. That is accurate. The officer leaned forward. If placed in the same position again without authorization, what would you do? The room cooled perceptibly. This was the real test, not of policy but of predictability. The guard considered the question for exactly the time it deserved. I would assess the same variables, he said, and act to prevent harm. The aide exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh quickly suppressed. The officer did not smile. You understand that answer limits where you can be placed. Yes. Certain posts require absolute adherence. Yes. The officer sat back. Then this review will recommend reassignment. The word landed softly, but it carried distance. The guard accepted it without visible reaction. Reassignment was not punishment. It was insulation. He would be moved away from proximity, away from places where quiet decisions mattered too much. The aide stood. This matter should conclude quickly, he said, for everyone's sake. The legal advisor closed her tablet. That will depend on the logs. The guard rose when instructed. As he turned to leave, the officer spoke once more. The child has been returned to routine. Good, the guard said. Outside the suite, the air felt warmer. Or perhaps he was more aware of it now. He walked the corridor back toward light and sound, knowing the palace had already begun to close ranks, smoothing the narrative. He had not changed the system. He had only interrupted it. For now, that would be enough. Reassignment came without ceremony. A single line in his schedule replaced Post 7 with a temporary internal duty, escort oversight, documentation review, nothing public-facing. The kind of position that suggested trust while quietly removing proximity. The guard read the notice once, acknowledged it, and adjusted his uniform accordingly. The new office overlooked an inner courtyard that rarely saw use. Stone benches, trimmed hedges, a space designed for visibility without access. He took his seat and reviewed the case files placed on his terminal, not his cases, escort movements, authorization chains, welfare compliance reports. Patterns emerged when seen together. Delays framed as adjustments, missing signatures described as system latency. Responsibility diluted into procedure. Mid-morning, a request appeared on his screen. Escort Oversight Review Minor Movement Log. He opened it. The child's name appeared, redacted except for rank designation. Movements before the lift incident were intact. Afterward, sparse. Routine resumed quickly as promised. The escort listed for the morning of confinement was different from the one assigned later that day. No explanation, just replacement. He flagged the discrepancy and added a note. Escort continuity unclear. The system accepted it without comment. A knock came at the door. The senior officer entered, posture neutral, hands empty. You're settling in. Yes. You understand this is temporary. Yes. The officer glanced at the screen. You're reviewing escort protocols. They intersect with child welfare. They intersect with discretion, the officer corrected. The guard did not argue. He scrolled to the relevant directive and highlighted the clause that placed welfare above scheduling. He did not speak. The officer read it anyway, eyes narrowing slightly. Discretion exists to protect the institution, the officer said. And custody exists to protect the child, the guard replied. The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Be careful how often you make that distinction. After he left, the guard returned to the logs. He noticed a recurring delay, authorization confirmations routed through a specific administrative layer, always just long enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts. It was elegant, almost admirable. He documented the pattern and marked it observational. Later, during a routine corridor pass, he saw the child again, at a distance. Surrounded by staff, posture perfect, steps measured. The child did not look at him. They had been taught not to. He felt no satisfaction, only the weight of proximity, how close harm had come without leaving a mark. That evening, Control messaged him privately. Inquiry from external oversight pending. Prepare documentation. External meant risk. It meant the narrative might not remain contained. The guard closed his terminal and stood, listening to the palace settle into night. Somewhere above deck, Issues were being weighed. Below, records waited. Protocol demanded patience. Custody demanded vigilance. The guard understood now that the conflict was not over a door. It was over who was allowed to decide, when silence mattered more than safety. Night duty shifted the palace's character. Lights dimmed to their after-hours settings, corridors lengthened, sounds traveled farther. The guard returned to his temporary post with a different awareness now, not of threat, but of alignment. He knew where pressure gathered, where it dissipated. An internal message arrived just after 2200. External oversight inquiry acknowledged. Scope limited. Cooperation requested. The phrasing was careful. Limited scope meant answers had already been shaped. He opened the attachment. A summary of events already drafted, neutral language, passive constructions. The lift experienced an unscheduled hold. The miner remained inside longer than anticipated. No subjects, no actors. The forced release was described as premature mechanical intervention. He annotated the document quietly, inserted timestamps, clarified durations, replaced remained with was confined. Each change was small, each one resisted erasure. Another knock. This time it was the legal advisor from the review, standing alone in the doorway. She did not enter until invited. "You're thorough," she said, glancing at his screen. "I am accurate." She nodded. "Those are not always the same thing." She handed him a tablet. "External oversight will ask why internal remedies were not sufficient." He scanned the prepared response. It leaned heavily on discretion and institutional stability. He looked up. Because internal remedies prioritized scheduling. The legal advisor considered him. "You understand that if oversight widens, names may surface." "Yes." "And that your notes increase that likelihood." "Yes." She smiled faintly without warmth. "Then keep writing." She left as quietly as she had arrived. The guard continued his review. He cross-referenced escort rosters with authorization delays. A pattern sharpened. Certain escorts were routinely reassigned after anomalies. Others absorbed blame and vanished into quieter posts. The system corrected itself by removing friction, not fixing cause. Near midnight, a message appeared marked priority. Control requesting clarification on his latest annotations. He replied with references only. No opinion, no emphasis. He let the directives speak for themselves. The courtyard outside his window lay empty, moonlight cutting the hedges into precise shapes. He watched the shadows shift as clouds passed overhead. The palace breathed, indifferent. Before ending his shift, he added one final note to the file. Custodial responsibility requires presence, not permission. He saved it, knowing it would be questioned. As he powered down the terminal, he felt neither defiance nor fear, only readiness. The conflict had clarified itself. Protocol was a structure. Custody was a duty. When the two diverged, someone had to choose. He straightened his uniform and prepared to leave, aware that his proximity to quiet decisions had been reduced, but not eliminated. Somewhere in the palace, a child slept behind guarded doors. That, for now, was enough to continue. The summons arrived before dawn, routed through control without comment. No subject line, no justification. Just a time and a location, one of the smaller council rooms overlooking the East Wing, rarely used unless discretion was required. The guard arrived early again. Morning light pressed weakly through tall windows, diffused by frosted glass that allowed brightness without view. The room smelled faintly of polish and old paper. He stood at attention near the table, hands behind his back, eyes forward. When they entered, it was not as a group. First came the senior officer, expression neutral, posture tight. Then the aide, different suit this time, lighter fabric signaling daylight authority. Finally, a woman the guard had not seen before. Older, composed, no visible insignia. Her presence carried weight precisely because it was undefined. They sat. The guard remained standing until the woman inclined her head once. "You may sit," she said. He did. She opened without preamble. "Your annotations have complicated an otherwise manageable situation." The guard did not respond. "You are correct in your facts," she continued. "That is not in dispute. What concerns us is accumulation." "Accumulation of what?" the senior officer asked carefully. "Attention," she replied. The guard watched the light shift across the table's surface. Dust motes drifted, slow and deliberate, the palace waking. The aide leaned forward. "External oversight has acknowledged receipt of our summary. They are satisfied for now." The woman's gaze settled on the guard. "Your continued emphasis on custodial framing risks altering that." The guard folded his hands. "Custody is the framing." A brief silence followed. "Not shock assessment." "You understand," the woman said, "that this institution survives by controlling escalation." "Yes." "And that uncontrolled escalation harms those it claims to protect." The guard considered the statement. "Silence harms them more slowly." The aide shifted in his chair. The senior officer glanced at him, then back to the guard. "You are being positioned," the officer said, "for a role that limits this kind of friction." The guard understood. Reassignment within reassignment, distance within distance. The woman continued. "You have been effective. That is precisely why this is difficult." She slid a thin document across the table. A proposal, temporary attachment to an external ceremonial unit, high visibility, low proximity, safe. "Accepting this," she said, "allows the matter to conclude." The guard read the document once. The language was generous, commendatory. It framed the move as advancement. "And if I decline?" he asked. The woman met his eyes evenly. "Then the matter remains open." The child was not mentioned. Not once. Not by name, not by implication. The absence was deliberate. The guard set the document down. "I will consider it." "That would be wise," the aide said. The woman stood, signaling the meeting's end. "We value loyalty," she said, "but we require predictability." As they left, the guard remained seated, listening to their footsteps recede. The room brightened as the sun rose higher, washing the table in pale gold. He understood the offer for what it was, a controlled exit, a quiet reward for quiet compliance. Pressure did not announce itself loudly here. It arrived as opportunity. The guard looked at the document again, then closed it without signing. He left the council room with the document folded once, precise along its center crease. The corridor beyond was already active, staff moving with morning purpose, voices low, routines resuming. The palace had accepted the day without pause. It always did. He did not return to his temporary office. Instead, he reported to control as scheduled, posture unchanged, tone neutral. No one asked about the meeting. That silence was intentional. It allowed choice to feel private even when it was. By mid-morning, the proposal had followed him. Not physically, but in the way people adjusted around him. An extra nod from a junior officer, a longer look from a supervisor, a conversation that ended when he entered the room. The offer was already being treated as decided. He reviewed duty rosters. His name appeared beside the ceremonial attachment beginning the following week. Conditional, pencil thin, easy to erase. A message arrived from the legal advisor. Oversight has requested supplemental clarification. Narrow focus. Attached was a single question. Why was emergency authority not escalated earlier? He read it twice, then he drafted his response. Emergency authority was requested. It was denied. No commentary, no inference, just sequence. He sent it and returned to his work. The hours passed in measured blocks. Lunch was skipped without notice. By late afternoon, Control requested his presence again, this time not in a council room, but in a monitoring suite overlooking a secured wing. The senior officer met him at the door. "We've received feedback." The guard waited. "The oversight body is satisfied with the explanation," the officer said. "They will not widen scope." The guard nodded once. "However," the officer continued, "they did ask about the child's escort." The guard felt the smallest shift inside him, not surprise, confirmation. "The escort has been reassigned," the officer said. "No further action required." Reassigned. The word carried the same soft finality as before. "And the proposal?" the guard asked. The officer hesitated, still available. They stood in the monitoring suite, screens glowing softly, feeds cycling through quiet corridors and locked doors. The palace rendered itself visible in fragments, each one controlled. The guard looked at the screens, then back at the officer. "If I accept, the matter concludes." "Yes." "And if I remain?" The officer's expression tightened. "Then you remain a variable." The guard considered the phrase, variable, something to be corrected. He spoke carefully. "The child will encounter other variables." The officer did not argue. He had no counter prepared for that. At the end of shift, the guard returned the unsigned document to control. No note attached, just the paper, unfolded, unchanged. He walked out into the courtyard as evening settled, stone cooling beneath the fading light. Somewhere above, decisions were recalculated. Somewhere below, logs were reviewed and revised. Pressure from above had clarified its purpose, not to punish, to align. The guard adjusted his gloves and continued on his route, knowing alignment was optional, but consequences were not. The maintenance bay sat beneath the east wing, where the palace shed its ceremonial skin and revealed strew. Seiture, pipes, conduits, steel frames bolted into stone that had once been enough on its own. The guard was assigned there on paper for oversight. In practice, it was observation without invitation. The air smelled of oil and dust. Tools rested where hands had last left them, aligned more carefully than necessary. Maintenance here was not hurried, it was controlled. The engineer arrived late, pushing a cart stacked with diagnostic panels. Older than the guard, shoulders set by years of compliance rather than fatigue. He nodded once and began his checks without prompting. The guard watched the lift interface as the engineer connected his panel. Numbers scrolled. Green indicators held steady. "Any fault logged?" the guard asked. "No," the engineer said. "System held exactly as instructed." "Instructed by whom?" The engineer did not answer immediately. He adjusted a setting, then another. "The system doesn't ask who," he said, "only whether." The guard stepped closer, eyes on the panel. Could the lift have been released earlier? The engineer paused, a fraction too long to be accidental. "Yes." "How early?" "Minutes after isolation," the engineer said. "The hold wasn't mechanical, it was administrative." The guard felt the confirmation settle, heavy but expected. No risk assessment triggered. "No threshold was crossed," the engineer replied. "Temperature increase was within tolerance." "For an adult," the guard said. The engineer glanced at him, then back to his tools. "The system doesn't differentiate." The guard looked at the lift shaft, imagined the sealed doors from below, imagined how compliance had been measured in acceptable ranges rather than human limits. He logged the exchange mentally, not yet formally. Timing mattered. "Why wasn't the emergency override flagged?" the guard asked. The engineer tapped the panel, "Because no one pressed it." "They were told not to," the guard said. The engineer's hand stilled. He did not deny it. "You'll be asked about this," the guard said. The engineer nodded once. "I know." Footsteps echoed at the bay's entrance. The aide appeared, crisp and out of place among exposed wiring. "We're finished here," he said lightly. "Thank you for your diligence." The engineer packed his tools without comment. The guard remained, eyes on the lift interface as the aide waited. "You've confirmed what you needed," the aide said. "There's no need to complicate it." "The truth is mechanical," the guard replied. "It doesn't complicate itself." The aide smiled thinly. "It does when you insist on context." The guard understood then. The system had worked exactly as designed. It had not failed, it had obeyed. And obedience, he realized, was the most dangerous setting of all. The aide did not follow him out of the maintenance bay. That, too, was a choice. The guard walked the length of the service corridor alone, the sound of his steps echoing off concrete instead of stone. The palace above felt distant here, its weight distributed through beams and joints rather than ceremony. He stopped at a terminal and logged in under his own credentials. No delegation, no proxy. He opened a fresh report and began to write. Lift system held under administrative isolation. No mechanical fault detected. Release available throughout confinement period. He paused, then added the final line. Occupant classification not considered by system thresholds. He tagged the report for internal engineering review and deliberately for welfare oversight. The latter would be noticed. A message arrived within minutes. Control requesting a meeting, not scheduled, immediate. The meeting room this time was smaller, windowless, its walls lined with inactive screens. The senior officer was there, alone. "You spoke with maintenance," the officer said. "Yes." "You understand that their role is technical." "Yes." "And that technical findings can be misinterpreted when removed from operational context." The guard met his gaze. The context was confinement. The officer exhaled slowly. "You are narrowing our options." The guard said nothing. The officer continued. "The system did not fail." "No," the guard agreed. "It functioned." "Then there is no mechanical culpability." "There is design culpability," the guard replied. The officer's expression tightened. "That is not your remit." The guard did not raise his voice. "Custody is." Silence settled between them, dense but contained. Finally, the officer spoke. "You are correct about one thing: the system obeyed, and that obedience is defensible." "Until it isn't," the guard said. The officer stood, signaling the meeting's end. "This will go no further." The guard rose as well. "It already has." Outside, the palace lights dimmed toward evening again. He felt the rhythm of the building now, the way pressure cycled, the way attention shifted. He knew his window was narrowing. Before leaving for the night, he checked the child's status through authorized channels. Routine. No anomal. Wise escort listed. Timestamps complete. He closed the file and stood in the corridor, listening to the distant hum of systems designed to be silent. He understood the truth fully now. No single order had trapped the child. A sequence of permissions had. Mechanical truth was simple. Human truth was layered. And layers, he knew, could still be peeled back if someone was willing to keep pulling. The corridor outside the secured wing was silent in the way only controlled spaces could be. No footsteps, no voices. Even the ambient hum seemed dampened, as if the building itself were holding its breath. The guard stood at his assigned position, posture formal, eyes forward, aware that this post was both ordinary and deliberate. His terminal vibrated once. A priority alert, internal routing only. He read it without moving his head. External welfare observer on site. Limited access approved. Escort assignment pending. Pending meant delayed. Delayed meant risk. He checked the time. The observer had arrived early, unusual. External schedules were typically fixed weeks in advance, insulated from daily adjustments. Someone had miscalculated, or someone had hoped the overlap would be avoided entirely. A second message followed, from control, Hold position, escort will be reassigned. Reassigned again. The guard's gaze shifted, fractionally, toward the wing doors. Beyond them were private rooms, controlled routines, layers of permission stacked neatly atop one another. Somewhere inside, the child followed instructions with practiced precision, unaware of observers, unaware of recalculations. He requested the internal movement log. It loaded slowly, too slowly. When it appeared a gap was already forming, escort departure recorded, replacement not yet logged. A narrow window, minutes, not hours this time. Enough. Footsteps approached from behind. The senior officer stopped beside him, eyes on the same doors. "This is not your concern," he said quietly. "There is no escort logged," the guard replied. "There will be." "Not yet." The officer's jaw tightened. "You are not assigned to intervene." The guard considered the directive. He considered the welfare clauses, the mechanical truth, the patterns he had documented. He considered the offer he had refused, the distance he had accepted instead. Inside the wing, a door opened briefly, then closed. A soft sound, ordinary, unremarkable, exactly the kind of sound that preceded explanations later. The guard keyed his mic. "Control, confirm escort arrival time." The reply was immediate. "Stand by." "Stand by again." The external observer's badge flashed briefly at the far end of the corridor, then disappeared as they were redirected, subtly, efficiently. The guard noted the maneuver without turning his head. The senior officer lowered his voice. "If you act now, there will be consequences." "Yes," the guard said. "Personal." "Yes." The guard felt the weight of the moment settle, not as fear but as clarity. This was not about forcing doors or filing reports. This was about presence, about refusing the gap. He stepped forward, just enough to cross the invisible boundary of his post. "I am assuming temporary custody," he said, voice calm, audible to the cameras, "until escort continuity is restored." The officer's hand rose, then stopped, too late. The guard moved toward the wing doors, aware that this decision would not be reversed by later language. Whatever followed would follow openly now. Behind him, control began speaking urgently into the channel. Ahead of him the doors waited, unlocked, compliant, ready to obey. The doors opened without resistance. That, more than anything, confirmed the guard's judgment. Systems designed to prevent access had not been engaged. Silence, again, had been mistaken for safety. He stepped inside the secured wing and halted just beyond the threshold, allowing the cameras a clear view of his posture and hands. No urgency, no concealment. He keyed his mic once. "Post assuming custodial presence. Temporary. Logged." Control's response overlapped itself, two voices competing before one cut through. "Stand down. Escort is en route." "Escort not logged," the guard replied. "Custody requires continuity." The corridor inside the wing was narrower, carpeted to soften sound. Light fell evenly from recessed fixtures, eliminating shadow. It was a place designed to look calm regardless of circumstance. He moved at a measured pace, counting doors, noting which were sealed and which were merely closed. The senior officer followed him in, stopping a step behind. "You are escalating," he said. "I am stabilizing," the guard replied. They reached the antechamber outside the private rooms. A junior staff member stood there, hands clasped, eyes widening briefly at the sight of the guard. "I was told to wait," she said. "Told by whom?" the guard asked. She hesitated. "By administration." "Where is the escort?" "I don't know." The guard nodded once. He positioned himself. Between the antechamber and the inner door, body angled to block without touching. He did not raise his voice. "Please remain here," he said to the staff member. "This area is temporarily restricted." She obeyed immediately. Obedience, he noted again, was never the problem. The inner door opened a fraction, then more fully. The child stood there, already dressed for movement, hands folded, expression composed. The guard met their eyes and inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement without familiarity. "You're early," the child said. "Yes," the guard replied. "There's been a delay with escort arrangements." The child nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "I was told to wait." "I know," the guard said. Behind him, the senior officer spoke sharply into his mic, issuing instructions that would be recorded and replayed later. The guard listened without turning. "I'm going to stay here until your escort arrives," he said to the child. "If you need anything, tell me." The child considered this, then nodded once. "All right." Minutes passed. Each one felt deliberate. The guard remained still, aware of every camera angle, every reflection in the polished surfaces. Control's voices softened, then quieted. The urgency shifted elsewhere. The gap had been closed not by force but by presence. Finally, footsteps approached, 2 sets this time. A properly logged escort arrived, credentials visible, posture rehearsed. The senior officer checked the terminal, then looked at the guard. "Escort continuity restored," he said. The guard stepped back, clearing the path. "Custody transferred," he said audibly. He waited until the escort and the child moved together, until the inner door closed behind them. Only then did he turn. The senior officer's expression was tight, controlled. "This will be addressed." "Yes," the guard said. They exited the wing together. The doors sealed behind them, systems reasserting order. Control issued a final instruction: stand down, return to post. The guard complied. As he resumed position in the outer corridor, the palace's rhythm returned to normal. Logs would be written. Language would be chosen. Consequences would follow. But the gap had not been allowed to exist. That, the guard knew, was the decision that could not be revised. The corridor felt different once the wing sealed. Not quieter, controlled spaces were always quiet but settled, as if attention had been released and replaced by something heavier. The guard returned to his post and stood exactly where he had been instructed, posture correct, gaze neutral. Compliance resumed. The difference lay beneath it. Control did not call him immediately. That delay told him more than urgency would have. When the channel finally opened, the voice was measured. "Post acknowledged. Remain available." "Yes." He waited, the cameras watched, the palace absorbed. An hour passed before the summons arrived. Not to a council room this time, nor to review. A private office near the administrative spine, where decisions were translated into language fit for circulation. The guard entered alone. The woman from the earlier meeting was already there, seated behind a narrow desk. No aides, no folders visible. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "You closed a gap," she said without greeting. "Yes." "You also created a record that cannot be smoothed." "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, assessing not defiance but cost. "The child is safe," she said. "Routine has resumed." "Good." "That is where this story will end," she continued. "Publicly, internally there will be adjustments." "Names?" the guard asked. "Roles," she replied. "Processes." The distinction again. People would move, systems would remain. She slid a document across the desk. Not an offer this time. A notice, permanent reassignment, not ceremonial, not distant. A quieter post with limited authority and no proximity to private movement. The kind of assignment that ensured reliability without influence. "This is not punitive," she said. "It is corrective." The guard read the notice once. He recognized the balance it struck. He also recognized the boundary it enforced. "I accept," he said. She inclined her head slightly. "That is wise." He stood to leave. At the door, she spoke again. "You should know, external oversight closed their inquiry this morning." "Yes," he said. They cited sufficient internal resolution. The guard paused. They did not ask to speak with the child. No, she said. He left the office without comment. That evening, as his shift ended, he passed the secured wing one last time. He did not slow. He did not look toward the doors. The work there was done for now. In the days that followed, the palace adjusted smoothly. Escort logs became more precise. Authorization delays shortened. Language changed in small but telling ways, not because of policy but because of memory. The guard reported to his new post. He performed it with the same precision as they. Last, no bitterness, no expectation of acknowledgement. The child remained protected by layers of routine, unaware of how narrowly silence had been interrupted. The palace continued, as it always did. And somewhere within its systems, a rule existed now that had not before, unwritten, unannounced, but present all the same. Weeks passed without incident. That in the palace was considered success. The guard's new post lay along a peripheral route, service corridors, staff entrances, transitional spaces where movement was constant, but consequence was assumed to be minimal. He learned the rhythm quickly. He always did. The work required presence more than judgment, observation more than intervention. Yet traces of the earlier events surfaced in small ways. A revised escort checklist appeared on terminals one morning, unsigned but mandatory. Authorization logs began to include justification fields where none had existed before. Delays still occurred, but now they were shorter, documented more carefully. Silence, once a default, had acquired friction. No one mentioned the lift. No one mentioned the wing. Late one afternoon, Control routed a routine inquiry to his terminal. Clarify welfare directive reference in historical log entry. It was his language preserved verbatim. He replied with the same directive numbers, the same neutral phrasing. The system accepted it without revision. That night, as he stood watch near a staff atrium, he noticed a familiar figure across the space, the child, moving with an escort posture unchanged, expression composed. The child did not look at him. Training held. The guard did not acknowledge the sighting. Custody, he knew, was not familiarity. It was distance held correctly. The escort passed without anomaly. Logs would be complete. That mattered now. Toward the end of the month, the senior officer requested a brief meeting. Not formal, not recorded. They stood in a corridor alcove out of traffic. "You've been quiet," the officer said. "Yes. That is appreciated." The guard waited. "The institution adjusted," the officer continued. "It often does." "Yes." The officer hesitated, then spoke more carefully. "There are limits to what can be acknowledged. You understand that?" "Yes." "And still," the officer added, "what you did altered how certain gaps are treated." The guard inclined his head slightly. No acceptance, no denial. When the officer left, the guard returned to his post. The palace lights shifted to evening mode, softening edges, restoring calm. He felt no pride in the change, no sense of victory, only a measured assurance that the next decision might not be made in quite the same way. On his final shift of the rotation, he updated his personal log, a habit he had never been instructed to keep, but always had. He wrote one line and closed the file. Presence interrupts silence. He powered down the terminal and stepped out into the open air beyond the palace walls. Night had settled fully now, cool and clear. The building behind him stood unchanged, imposing and immaculate, its systems humming in quiet obedience. The guard adjusted his coat and walked on. Somewhere inside, doors closed and opened as they always would. But one gap, small, procedural, easily ignored, had been closed not by authority, but by a decision made in full view. That was enough.